Close your eyes for just a moment and imagine this. You have walked for 11 days straight, through desert heat that cracked your lips raw, through cold mountain passes that turned your sandals to blocks of ice, through valleys that smelled of wild thyme and animal dung, and now, as the sun breaks over the ridge of the Mount of Olives, you see it for the first time. Not a building, not a temple, a world. A vertical city of white marble and hammered gold rising so impossibly high from the hilltop that for one fractured second, your exhausted mind cannot process what your eyes are sending it. The structure catches the early morning sun and detonates it, a blinding nuclear flash of white and gold that spreads across the entire horizon like the sky itself has cracked open. Pilgrims around you collapse to their knees. Men who have never wept in public press their faces into the dirt and sob. Ancient writers recorded that travelers approaching Jerusalem from the east often had to shield their eyes as though looking directly into the sun itself, not from poetic exaggeration, but from physical, optical reality. The gold plates covering the facade were not decorative. They were weapons of awe, engineered to destroy your composure from a mile away. This was Herod's temple, the greatest building project in the ancient Mediterranean world, a structure that redefined what stone and human ambition could achieve together, and a sacred space so charged with divine presence that the wrong person standing in the wrong room could be struck dead where they stood. Today, we are going inside. All the way inside. To understand the experience of entering this temple, one must first understand the man who built it. Because in the ancient world, buildings did not exist separately from the personalities that commissioned them. Herod the Great was a man of profound contradictions. He was not a priest, not a theologian, not even, in the eyes of much of the Jewish world, a fully legitimate Jew. His family, the Idumeans, had been forcibly converted to Judaism only a generation before his birth, and that taint of inauthenticity followed him everywhere. He was appointed king of Judea by Rome, which meant that in the eyes of his own subjects, he owed his crown to the same foreign empire they despised. His personal life was a theater of horror. He executed his own sons on suspicion of treason, murdered his beloved wife Mariamne in a fit of jealous rage, and spent his final years in such physical agony, his body rotting with worms, uncontrollable convulsions, and gangrenous flesh, that historians have speculated for centuries about what disease finally consumed him. And yet this man built something so astonishing that his enemies praised it, his successors marveled at it, and the Jewish historian Josephus, writing decades later in the shadow of its destruction, called it one of the most extraordinary achievements in human history. Herod's motivation almost certainly had more to do with politics than piety. By transforming the modest Second Temple into an architectural colossus, he was purchasing the one thing his birth, his personality, and his Roman overlords could never give him: the loyalty of the Jewish people. He employed 10,000 skilled laborers and trained priests specifically as stonemasons, so that no secular hand would ever profane the sacred interior. The outer platform alone, a massive artificial plateau supported by limestone blocks, some weighing over 500 tons, covered an area equivalent to roughly 26 American football fields. It remains, to this day, the largest artificial platform ever constructed in the ancient world. As you approach Jerusalem from the south in the 1st century, your journey to the temple has already begun hours before you can see its walls. The road is never empty. On ordinary days, it pulses with local traders, Roman soldiers, Levite priests, and the steady stream of Jewish pilgrims who came to the city 3 times a year for the great festivals of Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. During major pilgrimage seasons, the population of Jerusalem swelled from its normal figure of perhaps 80,000 inhabitants to an almost incomprehensible 500,000 or more. The historian Josephus records that during one particular Passover, Roman officials counted the lambs slaughtered on the eve of the festival and arrived at a figure exceeding 250,000 animals, a number that, even accounting for ancient exaggeration, suggests a city bursting at every seam with human bodies, animal noise, cooking fires, and prayer. You smell the city before you see the temple. Wood smoke and roasting meat, the sharp bite of the tanneries, the organic weight of animal pens, the sweetness of baking bread mixing with the iron tang of blood from the sacrifice pits. But threading through all of it, carried on the breeze from the direction of the sanctuary itself, is something else, something warm and resinous and ancient. A combination of frankincense, myrrh, cinnamon, and saffron blended into the sacred incense that burned without interruption on the golden altar inside. That smell, more than any visual spectacle, was the announcement. The temple was near. Before you can enter, however, you must become clean. Not metaphorically, literally, physically clean, according to a precise ritual system that had governed Israelite worship for over 1,000 years. Any contact with a corpse, any discharge from the body, any skin condition classified under the broad umbrella of tzurat rendered a person ritually unfit to enter the temple precinct. Surrounding the southern wall, archaeologists have excavated dozens of mikvayot, rock-cut ritual immersion baths fed by naturally collected rainwater, with carefully designed stepped entrances that kept those entering separated from those exiting. You would descend into the cold, dark water, submerge completely, every hair, every fingertip, and rise on the other side as someone new. Reborn. Ready. In the mountain air of Judean winters, immersing in an outdoor mikvah was an act of physical commitment, a statement of intention made with the whole body rather than just the lips. Only then, cold and shivering with something that was perhaps equal parts chill and anticipation, would you climb the monumental staircase sweeping upward toward the Hulda gates in the southern wall. These steps were wide and deliberately irregular in their depth, alternating between broad and narrow treads in a pattern designed to force you to slow down, to pay attention, to make the approach to the sacred impossible to rush. Passing through the Hulda gates, you entered a long underground tunnel, a vaulted passageway burrowing through the southern wall, leading upward into the heart of the Temple Mount. The darkness was complete. After the blazing Judean sunlight, your eyes went temporarily blind. And then, after a minute of climbing in absolute darkness, the tunnel ended, and the world exploded back into brilliant light. You were standing in the court of the Gentiles. And it was nothing like what you expected. If you had imagined the temple as a place of hushed reverence and whispered prayer, the court of the Gentiles was its absolute opposite. It was, by any honest description, a market, a loud, chaotic, brilliantly alive market stretched across the largest paved plaza in the ancient world, surrounded on all sides by magnificent colonnaded porticos where 40-foot marble columns created the effect of a vast outdoor hall. The noise hit you like a physical force. The bartering shouts of merchants selling sacrificial animals, the panicked bleating of sheep and doves, the metallic percussion of coin changers converting Roman currency into the temple shekel, the babble of a dozen languages, Aramaic, Hebrew, Greek, Latin, Egyptian, Parthian. The court of the Gentiles was the most cosmopolitan space in the ancient Jewish world, the only part of the temple complex open to non-Jews, drawing thousands of curious Romans, Greek philosophers, and Egyptian traders to the spectacle of the most famous religious monument on the eastern Mediterranean seaboard. It was here, according to all four gospel accounts, that Jesus of Nazareth overturned the tables of the money changers in an act of prophetic fury that set in motion the chain of events leading to his arrest. Standing in the court of the Gentiles, one can understand both the anger and the political danger of such an act. This was not a quiet corner of the temple. This was its economic heart, the place where the sacred and the commercial had reached a working but deeply uneasy accommodation. Yet even amid its noise, the court of the Gentiles never let you forget where you were. Towering above the marketplace was a massive white stone wall, and set within it at regular intervals were stone pillars bearing inscriptions in both Greek and Latin. The words were not invitations. They were warnings. No foreigner shall pass within the balustrade around the sanctuary. Whoever is caught will have himself to blame for his death which follows. Rome, uniquely, allowed the Jews to enforce this with capital punishment, even against Roman citizens. Such was the diplomatic sensitivity surrounding the temple and its sanctity. Here is something worth pausing to consider. You have just walked through the outer court of the most sacred Jewish site in the world, and it sounds like a bazaar, smells like a livestock pen, and looks like a global marketplace. Does that surprise you? What did you expect the approach to the divine to feel like? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. For the Jewish worshiper, the real journey now began. You climbed a low flight of steps and approached the beautiful gate, a towering entrance covered entirely in Corinthian bronze, a metal alloy so lustrous and reddish gold in tone that some ancient writers ranked it above even silver and gold in beauty. The gate required 20 men to move it on its massive hinges each morning and evening. When the sun hit it at the right angle, it threw back a warm amber light that spread across the courtyard like firelight. Passing through it was, by design, an experience of transformation, from the noisy public world outside into the hushed, charged atmosphere of the sacred precincts. Beyond the beautiful gate lay the court of the women, and the name requires immediate clarification because it consistently misleads modern readers. This was not a segregated or lesser space. It was the furthest point any Jewish person, male or female, could advance without bringing a sacrifice or having a specific priestly function. The court of the women was significantly quieter than the Gentile court outside. What you heard here was the sound of prayer, low, murmured, intense, and the soft metallic clink of coins dropping into the 13 trumpet-shaped collection boxes lining the walls. These shofaro, named for the shofar horn they resembled, were designated for specific purposes. One for the half-shekel temple tax, one for free will offerings, one for the purchase of wood for the altar fire. The atmosphere was one of focused intention, of people who had traveled great distances and now stood at the threshold of what they had come for. Looking ahead from the court of women, your gaze was drawn upward to the Nicanor Gate, a towering entrance flanked by 2 great columns, with 15 semicircular steps cascading down toward you in a broad arc. These steps were not merely architectural, they were a stage. On them, daily, stood the Levites, dressed in fine white linen, their lyres and harps and cymbals of polished bronze arranged before them, singing the 15 songs of ascent, Psalms 120 through 134, one psalm for each of the 15 steps. Their voices, trained from childhood in the acoustics of stone, filled the enclosed courtyard with a resonance that travelers described as utterly unlike anything they had heard anywhere else in the world. The sound bounced off the high walls and returned from 3 directions simultaneously, creating the impression that the music was coming from inside the stone itself. It was, by every account that survives, devastating in its beauty. If you were a Jewish man bringing an animal sacrifice, a lamb for a burnt offering, a pair of doves for a sin offering, you would now ascend the Nicanor steps and enter the court of Israel. This was a narrow strip of courtyard running along the eastern wall of the court of the priests, essentially a viewing platform close enough to the altar to see every detail, but separated from the priest's domain by a low stone barrier that carried enormous theological weight. The court of the priests was dominated by the great altar of burnt offering, a massive structure of unhewn stone, 32 cubits square at its base and 10 cubits high, reached by a ramp of packed earth on its southern side. On this altar, the sacrificial fires burned without interruption, day and night, all year round. On major festival days, the Mishnah records that the blood running from the altar into the drainage channels was sufficient to carry debris all the way down to the Kidron Valley below. The air in the court of the priests was a complex sensory environment no modern analogy captures adequately. The overwhelming sweetness of incense from inside the sanctuary reached you as a warm background note, woody, slightly medicinal. Overlaid on it was the sharp, metallic smell of blood, fresh and copper-bright in the morning air. And cutting through both was the smell of roasting meat and singed hair. a rich, fatty smoke that settled in your clothes and hair and remained for hours. When a pilgrim returned to their lodgings in the evening, the smell of the temple came with them. It was, in the most literal sense, a perfume, the smell of contact with the holy. The animal you brought, which you had raised, which you perhaps knew by sight, which represented a real economic sacrifice, was the physical vehicle by which your prayer, your contrition, your gratitude was made concrete and sent upward. When you laid your hands on its head before handing it to the priest, you were transferring something of yourself into the animal, and then watching as fire and smoke completed the transfer heavenward, rising in a column visible for miles across the Judean hills. Before we step inside the sanctuary itself, what do you think was inside the Holy of Holies, the most sacred room in the ancient world? The Ark of the Covenant? A golden throne? Something else entirely? Leave your guess in the comments right now, before we reveal the answer. And then, beyond the altar, there it was. The temple sanctuary rose before you like a wall of compressed light. The facade stood approximately 150 feet high and 150 feet wide, a perfect square of pure white marble, every surface not covered in gold dazzling white against the blue Judean sky. The historian Josephus, who had seen it himself before the Roman destruction, wrote that at the first light of morning the temple reflected the sun with such intensity that visitors were compelled to turn their eyes away as they would from the sun itself. From a distance, he wrote, the building appeared to be a mountain of snow, for those parts not gilded were of exceeding whiteness. Above the great golden entrance hung the most celebrated decorative element in the entire complex, a golden vine crafted from pure gold, its trunk as thick as a man's body, its branches spreading across the full width of the entrance, its grape clusters hanging at the height of a man's head. The vine was a national symbol, an emblem of Israel itself, enriched by generations of donors who hung their own golden grapes and golden leaves upon it as offerings. By the 1st century, the vine had grown so heavy with accumulated donations that, according to the Talmud, 300 priests were required to move it when cleaning was necessary. Inside the sanctuary, behind the great embroidered veil, woven in blue, scarlet, and gold, depicting the entire universe of creation, lay the Holy of Holies. In the first temple, this innermost chamber had held the Ark of the Covenant, the gold-covered chest containing the stone tablets of the 10 Commandments, the staff of Aaron, and a jar of manna. But the Ark had disappeared during the Babylonian destruction in 586 BCE. It was never recovered. Its fate remains one of history's most enduring mysteries. In Herod's temple, the Holy of Holies was empty. Not empty in the sense of unfurnished, empty in the sense of containing nothing. No idol, no image, no statue, no representation of God of any kind. Just a flat rock, the Even Hashetia, the foundation stone, upon which Jewish tradition held that the world had been created, upon which Abraham had bound Isaac, upon which Jacob had dreamed of angels ascending and descending. And above it, nothing. Air. Darkness. Silence. When the Roman general Pompey forced his way into the Holy of Holies in 63 BC, the first non-Jewish person to ever enter the room, he emerged visibly shaken. He had expected an idol, a treasury, some physical object worthy of such extreme protection. Instead, he found a dark, silent room and a stone. He told his men he finally understood something important about this people he had conquered, though ancient sources do not record exactly what he understood. For the ancient Jewish worshipper, the emptiness was the point. Every pagan temple in the Mediterranean world contained a cult statue, a physical representation of the god at the center of that religion's worship. The absence of any such image in the Holy of Holies was not a poverty of imagination. It was its most sophisticated theological statement that the God of Israel could not be contained by human hands, could not be represented by human art, could not be reduced to an object that could be carried, captured, or destroyed. The God of Israel was not in the room. The God of Israel was in the emptiness, in the silence itself. Only one person was ever permitted to enter this room, the high priest, and only once per year, on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. On the day itself he entered alone, carrying a censer of burning incense so that the smoke would fill the space before him and shield him from what waited inside. Outside, the entire nation stood in absolute silence, listening for the sound of his footsteps, the small golden bells on the hem of his robe, waiting for proof that he had survived. When he emerged alive from the Holy of Holies, the crowd erupted in celebration. Josephus writes that the sound was like thunder. Leaving the temple was its own kind of journey. You descended through the courts in reverse, from the sacred interior back through the noise of the outer world, carrying with you the smell of incense in your robes, the image of the golden sanctuary seared into the back of your eyes, the memory of the Levites singing on the steps, the sound of thousands of voices in prayer. You descended through the Hulda gates and back into the tunnel, emerging on the southern steps into the full afternoon heat of the Judean sun. Pilgrims who had traveled 11 days to be here now began their 11-day journey home. They would carry the temple back with them in 100 small ways. In the stories told at family tables in Alexandria and Babylon and Rome, in the prayers said facing Jerusalem 3 times each day, in the scent of incense that perhaps lingered in a folded garment for weeks. The temple was not merely a building they had visited. It was a center of gravity around which the entire Jewish world organized itself, an axis of meaning that shaped time, economy, theology, and identity. Herod had built it to last forever. It lasted less than a century after his death. In 70 CE, after a catastrophic Jewish revolt against Roman rule, the Roman general Titus surrounded Jerusalem and, after a siege of several months, breached the walls and burned the temple to the ground. The fire was so intense that the gold plates melted and ran in liquid streams into the cracks between the stones, which is why Roman soldiers dismantled the walls stone by stone to extract the gold from the gaps, inadvertently fulfilling, almost surgically, the prophecy that not one stone would be left upon another. What remained was a platform of stones, a wall on the western side, and a silence that has lasted 2,000 years. That western wall still stands today, and every year millions of people press their hands against its ancient stones, close their eyes, and try to feel something of what those first-century pilgrims felt. Standing in that blazing, golden, incense-drenched, music-filled world that Herod built and Rome destroyed and no one has ever been able to rebuild, and which, according to a tradition as old as the destruction itself, the Jewish people have never stopped mourning and never stopped hoping to see again. Thank you for journeying through the ancient world with us today. If this exploration moved you, challenged your thinking, or satisfied your curiosity, hit the like button, subscribe to Biblical Worlds for more immersive documentaries, and tell us in the comments which part of the temple experience hit you hardest. We read every comment, and the best ones become the basis for future episodes.